It's a very good book in. I will read the book to you. I am reading from this book right here by Tom Robbins. I've been reading this book forever. It's taken me a million years, it feels like. What the hell is on my face? Paint? Alright. Jitterbug Perfume. It's a good book. I like it. It's about some crazy shit. But right now, we're on page 156. And if you would like to hear more of this book, you can find it on YouTube in many different ways. Go to my main channel and you can find a playlist with all the videos in it. So right here we're going to start. Actually, I ended on 157, but I'm going to go back here to 156. And I'm just going to read as far as I can read. And then, yeah. So when I read the book, I don't really like read it like straight through. I try to make it at least interesting, and then I stop and talk about it sometimes, and it just goes on and on and on. That's why it's taken me forever to read it. All right, here we go. Early in the 1300s, attending the fair at Berriquer, in the south of France, they encountered a group of people who oh my god, what is that word? They oh my gosh, it's gonna be a rough one, you guys. Bear with me. For travel made Kudra and Alabar seem as though they were chained to a stump. Alright, these are our main characters here, Kudra and Alabar. These are the couple we're following. He's a king, she's his queen. Alright, here we go. These nomads rumbled from town to town, fair to fair, in brightly colored wagons. Oh, they're talking about some other people now. Variously called Lygopisans. What the heck is that? That's a weird word. Bohemians or gypsies. Oh, I would know those words. Yes. Let's see here. Gypsies. They were oh my gosh, this word right here. I'll get better. Hold on. Ostensibly. Oh, that's a word right there. They were ostensibly inherent metal workers, but music and magic were their true vocations. Although the gypsies were new to Europe, Kudra had known them in India and could converse in their dialect. Moreover, the pigmentation was the same shade as theirs. What, their skin? Had the same color skin? So what? Oh, I guess they blended in or something. Let's see here. Let's see. Their chief invited her to join them. Reluctantly, he agreed to include Alabar. For the next half-century, time flies when you're having fun. They lived as gypsies. What? They're immortal, by the way. If you're just tuning in, these two, they're immortal because they could do the Jitterbug Perfume. Alright, hold on. Where are we? For the next half-century, blah, 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 they lived as gypsies, bumping over the quasi-roads of the continent in a red and orange donkey cart. And a red and orange donkey cart. That sounds nice, actually. It's not bad. Sleeping in a tent of woven fabrics, kept precariously in place by stones, warming themselves with tzatziki, that charming fuel made of cow dung and straw. They indulged in some serious horseshoeing and harness making, but more frequently their band earned its living amusing and sometimes fleecing. Oh, they made little fleece things. They made some fleece. Fleecing visitors to holy sites, festivals, and fairs. The gypsies danced, they sang and strummed. They navigated the pea beneath a walnut shell to sickly you wager your last sow that it was beneath the one next door. When they shook their tambourines and citrums? What the heck is a citrum? You guys, go look it up. Sistrum. S-I-S Trums in voluptuous poses. Feudal barons found them irresistible. But that made them all the more hateful in the eyes of the pious and grave, a reaction that was for Alabar a source of endless delight. Gudra chilled him for the mildly, but he was rarely happier than the savoring the fear and disgust they welled up in the proper Christian at the sight of their randling, tickling troop. That make any sense? The option that all good things must come to an end is a confession of fatalism that the immortalist hand of Alabar would never sign. Nonetheless, he realized his days as a gypsy were numbered, when he surprised several of the chief's sons ransacking his and Kudra's belongings, searching for their presumed elixir of youth. As a matter of fact, their tent and wagon had been broken into thrice before. But Alabar had written it off to routine gypsy thievery and to the gypsies' instance on treating them second-class citizens. Claiming to be the direct descendants of the biblical Cain, the gypsies considered themselves a race elite. It was obvious that their ethnocentricity would never allow complete acceptance of outsiders, no matter how compatible. They not only stole from Kudru and Alabar, but they also served them last at communal meals and required them to perform occasional mental chores. For example, on Saturday, Kudru was expected to clean the chief's wagon and launder his many brilliant scarves. It was while she was sleeping out the executive cart, sweeping, one day, that she noticed the chief's wife's famous crystal ball had been left uncovered. For a while, Kudru managed to ignore the naked sphere, but at last curiosity got the best of her, and she peered into it shyly at first, then so piercingly that the chief's laundry could have hung out to dry on her gaze. She saw nothing in the ball. There was nothing to see. It was, after all, a mere lump of polished glass. At a point of departure for the psyche, however, a crystal ball had merit, although a mandala, a seashell, or a cigarette pack could be effectively employed. There are apparently few limitations either of time or space on where the psyche might journey, and only the customs inspector employed by our inhibitions restricts that it might bring back when it re-enters the home country. Wait, what? When it re-enters the home country of everyday consciousness. When Kudra shut her eyes to rest them after their intense probing of the crystal innards. A vivid scene unfolded in her mind. She saw Alabar and herself bound with rope in a process of being tortured by the gypsies, who were demanding a map of Fountain of Youth. The map! Where is the map to the Fountain of Youth? Tell us to give it to us now. This is her vision. She saw it. When she turned to the tent, Kudra told Alabar of her vision. That settles it, he said. That night, when the moon had set, they stole away. That means they ran away, right? They got the hell out of there. As they disappeared into the woods, they glanced back to see a shadowy figure advancing on their tent. Oh. In the excitement of their escape, Kudra had neglected to inform Alabar that she had consulted the crystal ball a second time ere she left the chief's wagon that Saturday. And finally, detailed scene had again flashed before her mind's eye as she rested after examining the crystal. This second vision seemed far less urgent, which is why she put it aside. But it was stranger, more difficult to interpret. In it, a tall black man, blacker than several shades. Then she was beckoning to her, laughing all the while. The black man wore the oldest clothes she ever seen, and the oddest item in his wardrobe was his cap. It turned out to be not a cap at all, but a swarm of bees. Fresh coffee. And that's where we left off last time. I remember that. Alright, here we go. Sip some coffee here. Although finished with gypsies, per se, Alabar and Kudra retained their vagabond lifestyle, working the European fair circuit on their own, alongside booths overflowing with cotton, furs, metals, wine, tea, Venetian glass, meat, produce, and livestock. They sold or traded aromatics to a populace that was beginning to appreciate pretty fragrances. Despite or because of the fact that it had yet to accept the concept of the bath. Right? People stunk. They're like, well, we might as well smell good. What was this, the 13th century? Or because of the fact that it had yet to accept the bath. When business was poor, Kudra slipped into her gypsy skirt and danced to the doodle. The doodle? The doodle. Alabar accompanied her on tambourine, less than approving of the leers his wife's dancing elicited from fairgoers of masculine gender. It nonetheless amused Alabar to meditate upon her real birth date as she undulated those secretly ancient hips and loins. And of course, it invariably alleviated his mood when the priest came by to consign them to hell for their distasteful display. Actually, the priests proved to be good customers. After Kudra decided to start manufacturing combustible cones from the raw aromatics in which she customarily dealt. Influenced by the Byzantines, the Western Church had become increasingly fond of the ritualistic burnings of incense, ostensibly as an invocation of the sweet oxygens of heaven, but more likely a way of combining the concentrated funk of sweaty congregations. Combating the concentrated funk of the stinky churchgoers. Let's see here. It appears as if incense might become a rage in the cathedrals of Paris. So Alabar was not overly surprised when the Kudra announced one morning that she wished to settle in the French capital and open a permanent shop. Wow. A shop might be a smart idea, agreed Alabar. But when you say permanent, you mean, of course, permanent compared to our usual knocking about. They had been on the road for several centuries. No, said Kudra, I mean permanent. I needn't remind you of the troubles in store should we hang around long enough to find our perpetual freshness before the envious eyes of our steady decaying fellow citizens. Sheesh. We can realistically expect 15, maybe 20 years as Persian incense merchants. That was close, right? But that will be a welcome change, a nice recess, and when the time comes, we shall move on. I am not moving on. I am finished with moving on. I want a shop. I want a home, and I want to stay there. Stay, repeated Alabar. How long, exactly, do you intend to stay? As long as... I don't know. As long as it damn well pleases me. Well, it better not please you beyond 15 years or so, because when it dawns on the neighbors that we aren't aging, but maybe I will age. What? Kudra gave him a look that you could spread on a bun. Her words, however, pricked him like the knife that does the spreading. We are capable of aging, if we want to. We stopped the aging process, and we can start it again. Haven't we fallen into a rut? Being the same age forever, for over 5 or is it 600 years? I don't know about you, but I'm a little fed up with it. I really wouldn't mind aging again. Alabar couldn't believe how calmly, serenely, even she had spoken the unspeakable. Icy fingers tickled the harpsichord keys of his vertebrae. You don't know what you're saying. Here, let me pour you some tea. You aren't awake yet. That's your problem. I am awake, darling. I have been awake most of the night, and the night before. I have thought about this through more sleepless nights than you can shake a tambourine at. And I'm ready, willing, and actually eager to settle down in one place, like normal people, and grow older like normal people. I am. Alabar held back, refusing to speak his or speak until his vocal cords could be trusted not to quiver. Alas, he waited too long, overshot the mark, and heard his voice go well beyond evenness into petrification. The finest stone carver in France would have been proud to chisel his mark on any word in the following sentence. Aging seems a high price to pay for normalcy. I do not care. I am willing to pay for it. Besides, I do not like getting older. I can always stop. Can you? Simple little question chipped from old basalt. How do you know for sure? 6 words weighing in at a ton, not including punctuation. We believe that we can start it and stop it at will, but the fact is, we have never tried. What if you cannot stop it? What if you just keep on growing older until the voice had become so rigid that it cracked? That's how molecules behave today, and that's how they behaved back then. Though in those days nobody blamed molecules for the brittleness any more than they credited them for plasticity. Until what? Until I die? First of all, Alabar, neither you nor I is convinced that aging has to automatically lead to death. We have talked about that many times. Where is the courage of your convictions? It is not aging that leads to death. It is the belief that aging leads to death that leads to death. Do I speak rightly or wrongly? You were probably right, squeaked Alabar in his newly broken voice. We do not know for certain, but there is only one way to find out. But what if I die? Then, by Shiva, I die. Dying does not strike me as such a horrible fate anymore. I cannot believe you are saying this. You are reverting. You are regressing. I am facing the truth, Gudra interrupted. And the truth is, there is nothing so almighty wonderful about this long life to ours. He recoiled as if she'd spit on him. She took his hand, kissing each spear-nickeled finger in turn. Spear-nicked, not nickel. Darling, she said, do you look at us? We're a couple of gypsies running from the dogs of authority. From town to town we go, fair to fair, sleeping in fields, eating those awful mango wurzels, selling pretty smells to hypocrites, and hard-ons to yeomen. To Yemen. To human? To what? To yeomen. Where is the value in that? What is the purpose of... We're alive, shouted Alabar. And there is no other couple like us on the whole round planet. Well, so what? Our uniqueness doesn't make the ground softer or give the beats flavor. It doesn't improve the feudal conditions or reduce violence or contribute to the welfare of people. What important thing do we have to accomplish in these past 600 years? We have beaten death, said Alabar, and this one was as firm and even as it is... What? And his tone was as firm and even as it had ever been. More than that, it was proud. We have beaten death. What everyone has ever been born since the beginning of time has longed to do, we have done. What could have been greater than that? Woohoo! To what end have we beaten death? We can't teach others how to beat it, or else the church would come down on us and wipe us out, and those we taught in the barrens. We can't sell this grand knowledge for the very same reasons. We are forced to hide our supreme accomplishment as if it were a shameful crime. Where is the glory in that? Our lives are selfish and covert, and none them too easy. What? Methinks that you had a greater life back when you were mortal. You were a king then, Alabar, a leader of men, and every day, every hour was charged with significance. And threatened by the Reaper. Charged, but threatened, because to the Reaper a king is no less fodder than a slave. In my clan, a king was actually an easier harvest. threatened by death. You have been. But look, what a life it was that was threatened. And look at it now, my raged gypsy. We are about to move to Paris. Yes, to ply the incense market trade, you noble warrior, to be my assistant. She paused. Together, they watched the sun break through the morning fog, coming back to the deserted fairgrounds like a dandy returning to the boulevard, prepared when the moment was right to strut some stuff with a clover stem. Kudra traced the pathway of Alobar's veins, through which such endless tides of blood had run. She kissed the forehead that had been greeted by so many rising suns. For you, she said, longevity, for longevity's sake, is enough. That is no longer satisfactory for me. Is there a position in the Karma Sutra that we have not mastered, a recipe for mango water that our cook pot has not memorized? Oh, darling, I know that life is good, and that it still holds surprises for me, but maybe death is good. Maybe. Maybe death is good too. Certainly if it offers some surprises. Relax now, don't get upset. My destination is an incense shop, not a tomb. But if I must age to have a happier life, then I will. And should aging lead to death, then I shall explore the planet of death, while certainly I have been on this terrestrial voyage a nice long while. Long enough, frankly, that despite my love for you, I grow bored. I will wager that death be 1,000,000 times more boring than life. If so, I shall come back to life. If we are truly immortal, we ought to be able to travel back and forth between sides. Ha! Scoffed Alobar. Yes, we ought to be able to. We ought to do all right, and if we had remained in the caves long enough, we probably could. We might have been able to dematerialize and rematerialize at will. But we cannot. At least, there is no hard evidence that we can. You talk about facing truth. The truth is Kudra. We hardly know what we are doing. There is so much more to this immortality business. So much we haven't learned from the Bandaloop. But no. You had to go and see the world. You could not wait. So here we are, half-educated and half-assed, conducting the greatest experiment in human annals, and not fully qualified to conduct it correctly, just groping in the dark like mice in a bin. Why, oh why, did I let you talk me into leaving the caves before we had all the answers? Well, I can tell you one thing, you're not going to talk me into aging. If you want to risk it, go ahead. But you're stupid. Kudra released his hand. I may be stupid, she said, but I am not a coward. And the sun pulled a cloud down over its ears, and the wind set to whistling a distracted tune. And crows that had been breaking on the fairgrounds crumbs glanced at some clock, or other realized that they are late for work. And the cook flames retreated into the soundproof cellars of ashes. And the tea in the teapot nearly broke its neck in the haste to evaporate. There's an old axiom. A couple's first quarrel is Cupid's laxative. Wait, quarrel. There's an old axiom. A couple's first quarrel is Cupid's laxative. You think? The next worst thing to quarrel is a compromise. They made one at once. Since Alobar had been nearly 40 chronological years older than Kudra from the start, it was agreed that Kudra could permit herself to age 4 decades, more or less, permitted, stopping when she had caught up with her mate, if she could stop, that is. As for Alobar, he would cross his bridges as he came to them. She did not move to Paris. Oh, wait, they did move to Paris. They did move to Paris. They did open an incense shop. It was located on the Rue Quel Balik, next door to the brewery and perfumery, across the street from a monastery and cathedral. It did all right. Their marriage, it is fair to call it a marriage, though no formal ceremony ever transpired, did all right too. Which is to say, the champagne was far from flat, although there were fewer bubbles per sip than there had been before the arguing started. Oh no! They argued always about the same thing. It's best that way. If lovers have to argue, they might as well specialize. And the arguments usually concluded with Alobar's complaint that they had left the Academy of the Bandaloop before they had completed their course. Oddly enough, he refrained from presuming... Wait. What? Oddly enough, he refrained from pressuring. Whoa. Oddly enough, he refrained from pressuring her to return to the caves for additional study. Perhaps because he was of the opinion that after so long a time, there were no vibrations left to study. If Fosco, the semi, could be believed, the Bandaloop had left the caves for good. Dance craze? Argentina, what? If they ever reached a point where they seriously considered separation, it would have been in the cruel winter of 1664, a season that no amount of firewood or any variation on Kama Sutra could quite warm up. Yet right in the middle of the shivers and their shouts, something came along to bind them. A slap-a-dash patch job by the mason of common sense. Who could it be now? Darkness arrived so abruptly that day, it was as if a gypsy had swept Paris under a walnut shell. Good luck, you gamblers, on guessing which one. By 4 o'clock, the street lamps were lit. Despite being called to work early, the lamps flickered dutifully, as though lighting a path for the snow. The snow would be along any minute now. The clouds promised it, and the lamps believed them. Alobar believed them too. He also believed that there would be no more customers through the door that day, so he bottled it against thieves. He bottled it? No, he bolted it, Michael. Come on. A gypsy who would steal daylight would surely steal incense and the gales of January. He joined Kudra in the back room. Paying him little heed when he entered, Kudra remained bent over a large candle, heating some newly purchased Some newly purchased storax resin in a metal cup. It's golden here, Alabar said. She answered, without looking up. As it relaxed its grip on itself, the wad of storax caused the room to smell like the center of a chocolate cream. What? Sometimes, when a stressful person relaxes, he or she, in a similar fashion, perfume the air around them. Alabar sat down and tried it. The candle glow that held Kudra's head like an object in the showcase allowed Alabar to count 5 silver hairs in her mane. He hadn't noticed them until then. It was all he could do to keep from crying out. He wondered if she knew. His thoughts flashed back to the afternoon that he met her. 8 years old and sobbing, fleeing the funeral pyre. He thought of her in the Himalayas, dressed as a boy, the glossy black explosion her tress had made when they tumbled from the turban. Then he thought of the fateful day when a combined concubine's mirror had shown him his own pale intruder. Such a chain of events that little fellow had set off. So still for long was Alabar when he finally spoke. Kudra flinched. She must have forgotten he was there. The corona of candlelight and the vanilla halo of storax ringed her concentrationally. What the fuck is that word? Her concentrically. That's a word? Contritically? As if she were twice blessed, a double Madonna. Huh? Kudra, she said, I have a splendid idea. And what splendid idea is that? She said, her head still bowed to the task. Let's sail to the New World. The New World? Yes, the New World. The land they stumbled upon when they finally caught up with that Earth is round. And I, was saying all along, only fortune hunters and Christian fanatics go to the New World. We are neither of those. Fortune hunters, Christian fanatics, and misfits. The last category describes us rather accurately. The New World. Ooh. You may be a misfit, Alabar. I am not. For any longer, at any rate. He leaped to his feet, and with two swifts yanked, reduced her silver quintet to a trio. Dropping the strands into the resin cup in front of her, he said, in the New World, you wouldn't have to sacrifice your beautiful black hair. Beautiful black hair. He's all mad that she's going gray. The heck? Kudra stared at the hairs in the cup. She may have denied that there were tears in her eyes, but the reflection of the candlelight upon tear water proved otherwise. See those, said Alabar. Those are worms from the rot of the grave. She squeezed her eyes shut. A single teardrop broke through. The barricades and broke through the barricades and made a run for it, only to lose its footing and topple into the cup with the resin and the hairs. Jeez, did he pull out multiples? What? Wait, he pulled it out. He pulled it out of her head? Was that a finer place than it had been? Alabar lay his hands on her shoulders and massaged them gently. Ooh, that'd be nice. Oh. Wait, where was it? The worms, the rot, the what? Teardrop. He said softly, we can sail to the New World. Kudra shook her head. We made our own New World, she said, but something has gone wrong with it. I guess New Worlds grow old. Pan was right. Immortality has its limitations. If only we had learned more in the caves. Ah, shit, said Kudra. Not that again. But darling, Alabar, I'd like to be alone for a while. But, please, Alabar. She picked the hairs from the thorax and flicked them to the floor. The teardrops vanished. Whether absorbed by resin, evaporated by candle heat, or welcomed into some misery dimension, we cannot determine, nor reward was ever offered for its return. Please, let me be. So Alabar exchanged his slippers for boots that reached all the way to his helms. Wait, to the helms of his knee breeches. Pulled a wooden knee-length overcoat. His brocade waistcoat tightened his lace collar. Until it pinched his Adam's apple, and went out into the night, where by lamplight he frosted cobblestone streets resembled marshmallow plantations at harvest time. Although he hadn't a destination in mind, he walked rapidly, soon finding himself in an obscure quarter of Paris, a squalid area without cobblestone or torch, an unpaved district whose frozen mud puddles reflected the shine of red lanterns. From every door the lewd breath of prostitutes rose like hooks of smoke. Huddled against the cold, groups of them called to him as he passed, and he began to get ideas. A misunderstood husband usually is armed with a blunt instrument. Its It's what? Its knob painted red like the fence of a judge, like the face of a judge. The prostitute he eventually approached was tall and blonde. As they discussed rates, her companion, a dumpy-aged woman whom Zalaba had not considered, moved even closer until he had wormed her way between him and the blonde. He had a rude animal odor. Wait, she had a rude animal odor and so many wrinkles that she could screw her hat on. What? Alabar was about to nudge her aside when the blonde slapped her with the muff, saying, "Get along, Lalo. This one's not desperate enough to want you." Lalo? Alabar? I thought it'd be thee. They shared a tearful embrace then and there, while the blonde jeered and first flakes of snow began to sip through the scarlet lantern shine. Then he escorted her to the incense shop, walking slowly, for Lalo was a nymph no longer, but an old tot who had quit the brothels of Athens. When the demand for her services waned. It was said that in Paris no whore was too old or ugly to survive. Kudra was both saddened and delighted by the sight of her. She brought out the best cheeses and served tea from the battered but cherished silver pot. Once Lalo was fed and warmed, they questioned her about Pan. Lalo was one of Pan's nymphs, wood nymphs or something like that. Hung out with Pan. The news was enough to sour the cheese. Pan was a ghost now, Lalo said. You could look straight through him. His heartbeat was no stronger than a sparrow's. His pipes could still cause the flocks to shuffle their feet, could still raise the fuzz on a peasant's neck, but he lacked the vigor or the will to play them very often. Pan continued to visit men, according to them, not in person, in sunlight direct and immediate, but in dreams, erotic nightmares, or in flashes of terror, the kind that explain nor understand. They could neither explain or understand. Lacking a direct relationship with Pan, modern Europeans were estranged from their flocks and their crops, from the natural world, and indeed from their own natural impulses. Grieve not for Pan, said Lalo, in a voice as scratched as the teapot, but for themselves as well. And what are the nymphs? Asked Kudra. It has been more than a century since Pan last chased a nymph. Without him in pursuit, the nymphs lost their identity, grew thin and mad. Many took their own lives. Others, like me, became horrors to Homers, seeking in each sexual copulation to recreate the old seduction, the old magic, the old feeling of unity. She sighed forlornly. I don't know why I hold on, but I do. They put Lalo to bed in their flat upstairs. Then they took to their own beds, where as the snow did its sums on the window sill, they snuggled and talked, eventually formulating a plan of action. They would get Pan out of Europe. The new world was vast and virgin. They would make a place for him there, beneath smokeless skies where primitive equalities prevailed. Far from any city, they would establish a new Arcadia, complete with flocks of goats and the Panagan Indians, so hounded now by Christian missionaries, could join with them in a free landscape in which the old gods and goddesses would be given their due. Why? They would teach the Indians what they knew of Bandaloop immortality. And moreover, Kudra would throw away her pennyroyal, and she and Alabar would at least have 5 children of their own. They would found a race of immortals, with Pan and their principal deity. Yes, wasn't this the grand destiny that had been eluding them all along? They grew drunk with the vision They grew drunk with the vision of it, while the sober snow looked on. When weather permitted, Alobar would strike out for Greece. Lalo could help Kudra with the business. To fetch Pan to Paris. They would nurse him back to health right there in the flat, while they saved and schemed for their passage across to the Atlantic. How much money have we on hand? Asked Alabar. Here, let's get up. Count it. I cannot wait to get started. Kudra pulled him back down into the blankets. We can count when it's daylight, she said. We have a new world to populate. I cannot wait to get started. She can't wait. She's like, fuck me now. Alright, what's the next thing? Prior to his departure for Greece, Alabar filled Kudra to the brim. She was saturated. He saturated her. She launched squadrons of sperm every time she sneezed. Oh my gosh, that's a lot. They circled Paris like microscopic angels, looking for harp concerts in the snow. Wherever she went, she leaked, leaving snail trails. So gross. Sticky and translucent upon work stool, carpet, and carriage seat. Needless to say, there was a standing room only in her uterus. Nevertheless, she failed to conceive. That the topography of her tummy offered no challenge to the abilities as a climber was the first thing Alabar noticed when she returned from Greece to his embrace. Yes, gross, right? The second thing he noticed, raising his disappointing gaze from the abdominal plane, was that there had been an exodus of gray from her hair, and that the skin around her eyes, which had been cobwebbing with wrinkles, was now as smooth as custard. In the 8 months that he had been away, she looked to have youthed a good 8 years. Kudra, you did it. You reversed it. So pleased was he that he forgot for the moment the vacancy in her womb. Right? Was it difficult? Did you have to labor at it? Will you promise me that you will never backslide again? She ignored his jabber and concentrated on Pan. If concentrated is the accurate verb, she could determine that Pan's whereabouts in the room only by focusing her nostrils upon the epicenter of the caprine aroma that was causing her entire inventory of incense to cry, "Uncle!" and edge towards the door. "Greetings, Kudra," said a familiar voice from the epicenter. "I thank thee for the hospitality, punny, and human though it be." Is it Pan? What? "You're welcome, sir," said Kudra. I think she turned to Alabar. "It is rather perplexing talking to someone you cannot see." "It is, Pan." "Nonetheless," said Alabar, "thousands of Christians do it every day. At least this god will talk back to you." He shoved a wine flask into the eye of a stink storm. The flask tipped and pink chablis commenced to gurgle out. Gurgle, gurgle, gurgle. Though not a drop hit the floor. I know what you mean, however. Traveling with an invisible who smells up the countryside is an ordeal I would hesitate to undertake again. I did not mind the stairs. I did not mind the stairs and the insults and the occasional stone, but I have not enjoyed a warm meal or a decent night's rest since we left Arcadia. You would think rural innkeepers would be less particular. I fear it shall present a problem in Paris as well. Indeed, he seems to have grown less observable and more pungent the further we journeyed from Greece. By the way, where's Lalo? Where did Lalo go? Kudra hesitated. Lalo, yes. Well, Lalo left. Ran off with a sailor from Brittany. How inconsiderate. She was supposed to assist you in the shop. What a bitch. Lalo is a nymph, not a shopkeeper, said Pan. She only did what she was meant to do. Yes, agreed Kudra. You are a god of the woods and the fields. How will you fare in this environment? Perhaps not well, said Pan. Art thou aware that I be the lone god who never hast a temple built in his honor? 'Tis true, not a single one. Not a single one. Men have always worshipped me outdoors. Alabar retrieved the flask, now half empty. Our shop shall be your temple for a time. As soon as we are able, we shall transport you to greener pastures and wilder company. Meanwhile, you'll have to make do. There are parks nearby where you may roam. We must, of course, contrive a disguise for your odor. Kudra and I shall attend to that right away. Now that she has come to her senses and stopped aging, I am confident she can provide, a scent for you and a baby for me with equal ease. Eh, Kudra? Kudra nodded in tentative accord. Alas, the task assigned her proved about as easy as skinning a rhinoceros with a set of false teeth. What the heck? Okay, let's see. Ready? The last little. We're gonna read one more little chapter thing, and then that's it. But you guys can hear all the past chapters. Look at all that I read and is on videos on my YouTube channel. So if you want to go back and hear me read any of that, sometimes I read it better than other times. Sometimes it takes me a minute to warm up. She knew from experience that patchouli wouldn't cut Pan's mustard. Ugh. What? Frankincense and myrrh might have reodorized the diapers of sweet baby Jesus, but they disappeared in the goat god's gulf of funk like rowboats in the Bermuda Triangle, and the sandalwood, clean, gentle sandalwood, lasted as long to the minute as a snowball in hell. A resinoid of storax filled with the tincture of labdanum, pressed from the fatty arteries of the rock rose, proved a sufficient camouflage for a walk around the block, but it had no more staying power than patchouli. As for civet, it only compounded Pan's indigenous musk, making his presence felt as all the more strongly. With a fortnight, Kudra had exhausted her arsenal of aromatics. There was nothing to do but dip into their savings. The New World Fund was growing very slowly, and purchase some perfumes from the monks next door. They would be unable to sail anyhow if they wouldn't conceal from conscious and repulsed noses their plastasmal friend. What was required was a perfume penetrating enough to obscure the bouquet of rutting goat, yet not so overpowering that it called undue attention to itself. There was a little to be gained by moving from one extreme to another on the olfactory scale. Ideally, moreover, the scent would have the capacity to linger, because a free spirit such as Pan could not be expected to go around dabbing at his wrists and neck bones every hour, as if he were a hungry marquis at a Versailles ball, at the fancy ball. Some balls are held for charity. There were critics who complained at 23 Rue Quai Balik. The beer tasted like lilac water and the perfume smelled of hops. What? As to the quality of the beer, we cannot testify. Perhaps a taste it today would have leave a sadder Budweiser. What? But then it came to perfumery. The monks were not inexpert. They, in fact, laid the foundation for the French fragrance industry. The fragrance house of Lefebvre descended directly from their early operations. The Quai Balik monks were amongst the principal suppliers to the courts of Louis XV. Their enormous amounts of perfumes were consumed. At the height of the Versailles, 20 to 30 perfume fountains were gushing rosewater night and day, and the men wore squirt rings loaded with patchouli. When their mistresses approached, they fumigated themselves and the air about them with fine spray. Louis himself changed the scent every 1,000 miles. But all this excess failed to compensate for the fact that royal sewage was disposed of inadequately and that there was not one bath in the court. A visiting English writer wrote of Louis that all the odoriferous perfumes his courtiers could get him would not ease his nose, and still he smelled a filthy stinkle. His hair was a funny century. Wait, what the fuck? This was a century and a half before the emergence of the great master blenders. But despite the monks' inability to put the Sun King's unwashed nose at rest, the fragrances they distilled were far from primitive. Could they lay the wreath on Pan? Hardly. Their famous rose water was no match for his granular output, and one by one he sent lily, lilac, lavender, and Lydian whimpered off with their eyes between their legs. It was a dark day for heliotrope when it was sprinkled upon the transparent god, and height of Nith was reduced to a low crowth, and particularly in a flash. The monk's most inexpensive product was a recipe that mixed rose oil with cloves, cinnamon and mace, musk, ambergris, citron, and cedar. With some experimenting, Kudra probably could have duplicated it, but Pan was impatient, and Alabar was worried. So they further fractured their finances and bought a vial. Oh shit, they bought a vial instead of making it. Expectantly, Kudra rubbed it into Pan's high wool, including in one of her passes the smooth underside of his scrotum. A swipe that gave him some pleasure, and her some trepidation. For there is nothing quite like the intrusion of an invisible erection to thoroughly unnerve a woman. The old goat might have seized the moment. Indeed, he reached for his pipes, had not Alabar threatened to address his private parts with a gesture appropriate for the preparation of eunuchs. So Pan, richly appointed, departed for the grounds. Richly anointed, departed for the grounds of Levure instead, only to return in a couple of hours smelling all too familiar, and relating how his kibitzing impermeability to any eye had disrupted a fashionable fete champarach. Some words in here I can't reach because they're in French. The most effective scent purchased from the monks proved to be an essence of jasmine. Yeah, the patchouli didn't work either. They're trying everything. The raw flowers had come from the south of France, where to this day are grown the finest jasmine blossoms in the world, unless one counts the bingo pajama Jamaican variety, about which virtually nothing is known. Ah, yes, leave it to Jasmine to soothe the savage beast, for Jasmine, in its delightful way, performs an olfactory pantomime of glad animal movements from time gone by. A few other flowers may be as sweet, but Jasmine is sweet without sentiment, sweet without... What the heck is that word? Effetness. Sweet without compromise. It is aggressively sweet, outrageously sweet. I am sweet, says the Jasmine, and if you don't like it, you can kiss my sweet ass. Expensive yet never cloying, romantic yet seldom melancholy, Jasmine has the poise of a wild creature, some elusive self-sufficient thing that croons like an organic saxophone in the tropical night. Pan's glands heard Jasmine's sugary howl, and were hypnotized into particularly suspending secretions. Jasmine may stand us in good stead, says Kudra. Alone, however, it fails short of perfection. Like a grand orator, it requires some lesser voice to introduce it. I am positive that a qualified master of ceremonies can be recruited. And failing at that, it would not be ruinous should it be forced to introduce itself. But what is a great orator without a strong platform to stand upon, without an enveloping auditorium to hold his words? Do you follow me? Jasmine is longer lasting by far than any floral we have tried, but we must find a theater to contain it, an anchor, if you will, to keep it in place, because to be efficient it needs to endure at least thrice long as it does now. In other words, they could use a top note and absolutely require a fixative and a bass. Oh, absolutely, that's what they... Since they couldn't afford to commission such a blend from the monks, Kudra must develop it. She had worked with aromatics such as so long in her life. We're talking sensory here, but Moving had no experience with distillation. She's not in the true sense of a perfumer. She doesn't know shit. Fortunately, jasmine oil is obtained by excretion rather than distillation, and she could manage it. She could do it. After a period of trial and error, she found lemony citron and an acceptable top note, and gave the featured jasmine a brief and flattering introduction. About to fix it and became moderate use. Wild into faction based and landed a beam at the barf. Ugh. A finer fixative has yet to be discovered. In the case, however, Abrigris failed to deliver the total satisfaction. It nailed it to the bouquet, the perfume, all right, but it did not nail the perfume to pan. Still didn't work. Jeez, at least not for long, since Abrigris couldn't be improved upon. This meant that the bass note, in addition to its unusual function as an accommodating and complementing platform, must also assist the fixative in prolonging the life of the aroma. A very special bass note was called for. Kudra didn't find it right away. Months, in fact, dragged by as she experimented and researched. In the meantime, a sardonic cuckoo was scrambling Alabar's Kudra's nest eggs, replacing them with obnoxious layings of its own. Ew. Yes, and it goes on and on for many more pages. Let's see if this next little bit is... How long is this next little bit? Oh, that's a couple pages. Alright, we'll just end it right there. On page 171. We didn't get very far, but we got somewhere. Thank you for listening. We'll talk to you soon. If you want to hear more of that, you can find it on my YouTube channel. That was Jitterbug Perfume. Jitterbug Perfume. Do-do-do-do-do-do. do 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 do